All right, I want to welcome everybody to the April edition of the 2023 year. Uh, might start all this over again. Anyway, I want to welcome everybody to the April 2023 meeting of the Division 5 of the Lone Star region. And tonight we have Bob Schrempp and Kevin Leddy. They're going to talk to us about Freee-mo. And I'm going to start. This is kind of starting a series of clinics I'd like to present to the division on modular railroading. And I think it's got a lot of advantages. There's a lot of different different modular formats out there. We've been discussing T-track and we'll learn about Freee-mo N and then Freee-mo, and that there's also the NMRA format. But the great thing with our division, it being a widespread division, is with the modular whereas it's hard for us to travel from city to city, probably on a regular basis to meet at somebody's layout. We can actually bring the layout all together and go to a place and set it up and have fun as a division together, or area, and other people can join in as well. So we'll learn all that coming up. First off, I want to in the news department. So of course, remind everybody that we have the Texas Express, the 2023 Texas Express National Convention coming up in August. And so if you go to 2023texasexpress.org to register, I think the tours are available now to register for. And I'm not sure about the op sessions. I actually got a invite to register for that. So I don't know if they're live yet or not. And there's that would be on a separate website. It's called operatingsessions.org or .com, I think. I would look it up in my email, but take me forever to look it up. It's quite buried. But anyway, you should be able to find all this information out on that website. So that should be a good time coming up. And there's a convention rate for the rooms as well at the Gaylord Texan there, if you want to reserve the rooms through that for that deal. In June, I actually was up in the Lubbock area this last Saturday, and so the few that are here on the meeting in Division 5s, yes, Robert said it's operatingsessions.com. So .com is right. But so in June 16th and 17th, I'm going to put out a announcement about this later this week. We're still working on a lot of details on it, but if you just go ahead and kind of mark that on your calendar, we're going to do an in-person division meet. So this is going to coincide with the Lubbock Area Model Railroad Association. They set up their trains and they have a T-track display. That's their format. So they set it up there it's going to be at the American Windmill Museum there in Lubbock. Big place, and lots of fascinating windmill artifacts. I actually have never been there. I've driven by it a lot of times, so walking through it, pretty cool place to visit. They got some big meeting room and a big banquet hall there. So we're working on lining up some clinicians for that. So if you want to come and attend in person, send me an email so we can schedule you for some clinicians or clinic session. Hopefully we'll get some quite a few people to present on us. And then on Saturday night, we're looking at doing like a catered dinner for that. So don't know what we'll get yet. So this is all kind of in the details. We're kind of throwing this together really quick, coming up. So it just kind of works out that it's in the middle of the summer. I actually don't have a lot going on in June. I can make it personally, but it kind of works out great that it coincides with their display setup there. So the public will be coming around probably on Saturday there on that, but we'll have some clinics and some other stuff going on. So we're working on like the agenda and everything for that, but just go ahead and put that on your calendars. And then we'll probably work out a room, get a room rate. I think the Windmill Museum has a rate, special rate that they get people that are coming there to visit. There's a hotel they work with on that. So I'm going to get all that info and trying to get all that together to send out with this announcement. So y'all will be the first ones to hear about that. And then other than that, so I think, John, I'm going to open it up to the floor if anybody's got anything they want to show real briefly before the clinic. And I know, John, if you're ready, I know you sent me some pictures, so I can share those now if you would like to do that.
Sure.
I need to get them open real quick. So let's see. All right. All right. Y'all should be seeing that picture there. So John, take it away and tell us what you got, what you sent us to look at here.
Okay. I've been 3D printing some files from the internet from some G-gaugers. And so I've got two different center beam lumber cars here, or flat cars, I guess you call them. And but they were built primarily to carry lumber. They're about 25 inches long each. I've got them in primer paint here. I've got to go back and sand out the primer paint and clean up some things and still apply a little bit of body putty, and then try to finish paint them. And then the big deal will be try to find decals to put on them. So this is my first foray into plastic models since I was probably 12 or 14, and I'm 78, so that's a long time ago.
What type of 3D printer did you use?
I've got a friend loaned me a printer. It's a what is it? It's
FMD or resin?
It's a Flash Forge. It's an FDM printer.
FDM printer.
Yeah. So these aren't models that I would take to a contest, but they look good from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
So they run pretty fair too. I've paraded them around the 200 feet of layout mainline, and they look pretty good. You want to go to the next photo? Okay, so this year I've been putting on fascia boards all the way around the layout. I've got about 200 plus feet of 11-inch wide, 8-foot long masonite that I cut and put. I put clothespins behind it, hot glued them behind it, and then I had to cut out for all the outlets and things and got it in there. And so this is part of my G-gauge layout that you can see here in the foreground. This is what you see sort of when you walk into the room. This layout's 51 inches off the floor. So I've just been trying to make progress. I'm hoping to have some guests come through on their way to or from the National Convention in Dallas. I live up here in Amarillo. You want to go ahead? Okay, so I've been starting to put down ballast for my tracks, and then I got a ditch here in between. And if you go to the next shot, you can see that culvert box a little bit better.
Let's see. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, so I 3D printed this culvert box, and I got to still weather it some, but I've been having a lot of fun with the 3D printer. I learned I didn't know anything about 3D printing before October, but a friend of mine loaned me his one of his two 3D printers, and so I've been working printing stuff out. And this was the first, just about the first item that I did that wasn't off of somebody else's railroad files. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Well, it looks awesome. I think the like the skirting and the fascias looks like it's coming along pretty good.
Yeah, it'll hide all the traction from the what's underneath. we have a house that has no attic, so all the ceilings on the first floor are vaulted all the way up when I had the house built, and so everything that came out of the previous attic is underneath the string layout. So, but you're welcome to come visit anytime. I'm in the Pike Registry. You can contact me through that, and my email is there. There may even be a phone number there, and I'd be happy to entertain anybody that wants to come. I've got a couple hundred cars on the layout. Some of them are in hidden storage, but they sort of disappear in this basement. And I have a basement. That's something unusual for Texas, of course.
They say you can't build basements in Texas, but they want to have a lot of swimming pools.
Yeah, that was the case when I lived in Houston for 27 years. But up here in the Panhandle, we're 3,600 feet above sea level, so we don't have that problem.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, John.
Thanks
John, do you have much of an integration of Arduino to control any of the activities on your layout?
No, Speed hasn't come over and fixed that yet.
I know Speed real well.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, I'm 78, so this railroad's called the late start and never finish, because I don't think I'll ever be able to, do the scenery the way I want it. And so the most important thing is to get it up and running. It's all hand laid track. There's over 1,000 feet of hand laid track, and about 55 plus switches out there on the railroad on the main level, and it runs pretty well. I'm really happy with it. I'm using easy DCC, and it seems pretty bulletproof. So if you're up this way, come run.
Cool. Anybody else got anything to share with us tonight? All right. Okay, cool. Well, there might be a few people joining us here a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bob here and let him present to us on Freee-mo and all the benefits and great things about it. So Bob, it looks like we're seeing your presenter display right now, so you might swap displays or.
That's not what I want to do either. Gotta love. There we go. Is that better?
Yep, there we go. Yep. All right, and then and Bob said ask questions as we go, if I'm correct, and I'll let you have it.
Feel free to ask questions as we go. Have a discussion type thing. Basically, I'm going to talk about what is Freee-mo and why is Freee-mo. I have some pictures of examples of Freee-mo. It's more than just a standard. It's one of the things we like to say. Freee-mo is not just a standard, but a way of doing modules, and we'll talk about that more. Freee-mo in our world equals free modular. We say that because you're free to do anything you want, almost within some constraints. But if you have a design or a location you want to build, you're more than welcome to, and it can work in Freemo. This presentation was originally written over 10 years ago. So at that time it was the latest, but it's still fast moving forward. We're getting new groups all the time. I can't tell you how many groups there are across the United States and North America. We've got some in South America. It's migrated down to Australia, and they've redone the standards into a metric for themselves down there. So it's a little bit of everywhere. And it operates more like a permanent or sectional layout that's modular than your traditional modules layout. And we'll talk about why. Layout sizes can vary. I've been in a layout that's as small as, I don't know, 150, 200 square feet. And in January, I was in 22,000 square feet. And so the size, it's very, very fluid. The basic thing is the main line centered on the end of a module, so the module can be rotated. So there are no backdrops on Freemo. Freemo modules are designed to be operated from either or both sides. And oftentimes they do have operators on both sides. And a module can be rotated 180 degrees. So you don't have a curve to the left or a curve to the right, you have a curve. And it's whichever way the setup designer that's setting up that meet uses it. Uses strong support of code 83. So we're using code 83. Again, this is towards the HO standard gauge. Emphasis on scenery and track flexibility. Freemo came out of people that were doing prototype models and wanting someplace to run them that didn't have a home layout, couldn't afford, or didn't have the space for a home layout. And they wanted a place to run their models that wasn't a plywood desert. And they were getting tired of the plywood deserts they were finding in a lot of the module clubs that they were going to and being with. Standard mandates that the first 6 inches of your track are flat and straight and perpendicular to the end. And that's really other than that, and minimum radius, you can do almost anything you want. The length doesn't matter because Freemo isn't a loop. Most module systems form a loop. So you're constrained to, you have a 2 foot long or a 4 foot long or a 6 foot long module, and you've got to have the right number, because if you have one on the right, you have to have one on the left so you can close the loop and make the loop happen. Freemo is a point to point or loop to loop or point to many points or loop to many loops. So it ends up being very flexible. They can fit in almost any space, and you can work around pillars and other obstacles in a room when you're building a module or building a layout. So for example, somebody could have a 5'7" and 3/4 inch long module with a 19-degree angle and a 2% grade. You could build that in Freemo. So if you had a prototype location you wanted to build that had a 2% grade in it, you could build that in Freemo, and it would meet the standards. It lets your creativity shine through on your modules. Again, we emphasize prototypical scenery and prototypical operations. So normally you're not going to see, or you shouldn't see, a big tornado. You're not going to see some of the other amusement park things that you'll see on other modules sometimes. And like I said, you're no longer constrained to a 2, 4, 6, or 8 foot long module. And you can build a module that meets your dreams. And you're going to have a presentation on this later, I think, but Jacob Dameron down in the Fort Worth area, or actually he's not in Fort Worth anymore, he moved, but he's in the Dallas area still, greater Dallas area. He's building Dallas Union Terminal. It's, what is it, Kevin, 45 feet long?
It's 40 feet long.
40 feet long. So he's building a section of modules that's 40 feet long. It's really something. I didn't throw any pictures of his in here because he's going to be coming. We have a single track and a double track mainline options in Freemo. So that allows passing sidings to be created from other people's modules at a setup. So you don't have to build a 40-foot long passing siding or a 25-foot long passing siding. You might build a double track module that's 6 feet long, and somebody else has got a double track module that's a curve, and 2 other people each have a 2-track to single track module, and you put those together, and all of a sudden you've got a 15, 20, 30-foot long passing siding in the middle of your layout that you're building. Very flexible. And each module contributes to the larger picture in the layout. I can safely say that every time I've set up, and like I said, I've been doing Freee-mo for over 20 years now, the layout is different every single time. So it's always unique. And so it's kind of like you're traveling around and going to different people's layouts all the time. The scenery profile, the Freee-mo interface, and allows the scene to flow from one module to the next. Sometimes you'll have some color variations because you'll have somebody doing out of Canada doing the bright greens and the lush greens of Canada, and then you'll have somebody from Arizona doing a desert scene, and so you get some weirdness there, but the profile flows and it still looks good. And I've said this before, but emphasis on realistic operations via DCC. We do some operating. It's slowly coming around more and more, but we're getting to dispatch operations and stuff like that. We're encouraging the use of higher quality materials. We actually don't recommend, or we recommend that you don't use standard 3 1/4 inch plywood. We've seen lots of problems with it over years, and we really recommend people use better, like Baltic birch cabinet grade plywood when you're building your modules. Spend a little bit more money and make it last a little bit longer and look a little bit better and be a little bit sturdier. We're always trying to pioneer new and better techniques and good methods. So one thing you won't find in the standards is any information on how to build your module. There's nothing about how to build a frame. There's nothing about how to build your legs. There's the standards of what you need to have, not how to do it. We've seen people do a lot of foam tops. We've seen foam tops come and go. We've seen people have problems with foam tops, other people not. We have a guy right now that's been working with composite materials and carbon fiber honeycomb for his top, which is very strong and very stiff and very sturdy and very light. He had a module frame that he could hold with his pinky, a 6 foot by 2 foot module, and he could hold the whole thing with his pinky. Adding the legs to it more than doubled the weight of the frame.
Hey, Bob.
Oh, yeah.
I have one question on the frame. I've read that dimensional lumber is discouraged in use. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
That is true. Yeah. Because we see a lot of warping and over time with dimensional lumber.
Right.
And so plywood is a lot more stable. And if you're if you've done any woodworking, and if you've ever used the cabinet grade Baltic birch plywood, it mills and cuts and shapes and holds screws almost as good as, if not better than, quality oak or not pine, but birch or maple, some of the hardwoods. It really is strong. So that's what we really lead people towards. So the objective is to provide a platform for prototype modeling and a flexible modular environment. That's standard S1.1, the very first line of the Freee-mo standard, or part of the first line. And so it's, and so we always push back to the prototypical modeling and flexibility. And then interoperability. It's very important to us that your module works with everybody else's module, and anybody that wants to run any type of equipment, whether they're running modern passenger cars or old time small equipment, it's going to run on your module. So we emphasize bigger curves so that bigger equipment flows and looks better and runs right, and minimum size turnouts. Number 6 is a minimum with a recommended of a number 8. Our minimum curve radius is 42 inches with a recommended of 48. And we've seen some people build some modules with like 60 and 70 or 80-inch curves, and they are just beautiful to watch trains run on. It's really something. So here's the basic Freee-mo end. Now, this will come up later, I think, but we talk about Freee-mo ends and we talk about internal joints. The Freee-mo end is the standardized interface where you're going to hook up to somebody else's module. If you're making a module set that's big enough that you want two pieces, we don't care what you do on your internal joint, because that's internal, because those two pieces come together and make a module. And a module can be one or more pieces. It can have one or more ends. And I say one or more because people build return balloons, loops and return balloons, so they only have one end. Or we have people that build Ys or junctions, and they'll have 3 or 4 ends. So, and each of those ends has to conform to this. So the two basic standards are a 6-inch tall by 24-inch wide with a single track in the middle. And like I said, the first 6 inches of track are flat and level on your module. The next interface would be the double track interface, and that's going to be a 26-inch wide end instead of 24. And there's 2 tracks centered exactly 2 inches apart in the centered on the module. Any questions so far from anybody else? Nope. Okay. Mainline tracks are centered. So this is showing 2 modules. One of them was a demonstration module, so they had it kind of open so you could see down in it. This is an older picture, and it's got some old connectors down in that we don't use anymore. But you can see how the 2 of them meet, and because the profile's flat, the scenery kind of matches up, and the first 6 inches are flat and straight and perpendicular to the end. And we use what we call fitter rails. You cut your rails back 1 inch from the end of your module, but you continue the ties all the way out to the end. That way you can ballast under your ties and ballast everything all the way up to the end of your module. And then during the setup, we install 2-inch long pieces of rail in between the modules. And if you look at that, you can see that the track really flows and looks nice. Because again, we're looking at trying to make as much of a home type layout as we can that's a finished, high quality, pretty product visually. Like I said earlier, 42-inch with a preferred of 48. Mainline track is code 83, and we specify woodland scenic fine light gray. Now, in all honesty, that's really at the interface. So if you're doing someplace that has red cinder ballast, we want you to put gray to the end, but then in that first 6 inches to a foot, you can mix the ballast just like the real railroad would to transition from the gray into your red. And then your entire module set can be the red ballast. And then when you get to the other Freee-mo end, we want you to transition back to light gray. And that can set your scene so that it looks correct for your scene, for your prototype location. Track height from the floor. We'll talk about this more later, but it's 50 inches nominal plus or minus 1 inch. And that means that the normal height of a Freee-mo module is 50 inches plus or minus 1. So you have screw feet, so you can raise it up and down to adjust for variations in the floor. Been to a lot of venues. I've seen variations in floors in 5 feet vary 2 or 3 inches. So sometimes the 1 inch isn't enough, but we make do. You can have modules that mimic gentle curves and other aspects of the scenery, just like in a real, the prototype scenes. So, and again, that's to make longer, bigger cars look better rolling around. Any angle, any length, it really doesn't matter. I mean, Jacob Dameron's doing a 40-foot long module set, self-supporting. They all have to have their own legs. Our feeder wires are 22-24 with a 12 to 14 gauge bus. Modules are reversible. You can rotate a module 180 degrees and everything still works. Wire color doesn't matter. This is one of the questions we often get is, what color is the right rail wire? What color is the left rail wire? And I'll talk about that here. When we talk about a Freee-mo module, we talk about looking in from the end. When you're standing outside your module, looking at the end of your module, what is the right and left rail? And so if you look on this one from the left end, the red wire or red rail is the left rail. But when you look at it from the other end, from the right end, the red rail is the right rail because there's a transition halfway through your module. So you can't just say that the right rail is always red wire, because when you get to the other end of the module, it's the left wire. So, and the way that works is when you bring another module and you connect it up, they connect together, and you can rotate that module around and hook it back up. And now all of a sudden, what was the blue rail is hooked to the red rail, and what is the, and vice versa. So you can see how that wire color, you know, you can't just say this is the red rail. And so because of that, Freee-mo doesn't specify the color, because that doesn't matter in what makes it work. It doesn't matter what color wire you use, it's still going to work. So we don't specify wire colors on purpose. And a lot of it's because of this rotation. Depending on how it is, you might have red to red, and you might have red to blue, or whatever color you're using. So there's really three methods of building a Freee-mo module. The first one is design pattern after prototypical location. You're going to go out and look at a prototype location. The second one is loosely based on prototype. So, you know, it's like I'm building the scene of the Cuesta grade in San Luis Obispo County on the SPE coastline. And so I'm going to try and get the look and feel of that, but I'm not really looking at the track layout or track plans. And the third one is module is freelance. You don't have a particular actual location you're building, but it's still based on prototype practices. It's a fictitious scene that really could have existed. Sheridan, this module happens to be a fictitious location. There is no place called Sheridan. The guy wanted to build a grain elevator though, so we put a grain elevator on a module, and having looked at lots of grain elevators, figured out what it would look like. But again, remember, no gimmicks. G got dropped on that. Look at that. No gimmicks. So we don't want dinosaurs. We don't want tornadoes. We don't want that. We want prototype things. So this is Glenn Fraser, constructed by Greg Furman. This is one of the oldest Freee-mo modules there is. It's one of the first ones outside of the Freee-mo. Actually was started in San Luis Obispo County, where I live, by a gentleman by the name of Chris Palomaraz. If you've ever heard his name before, he's around in the modeling community. And it migrated from there up into the Bay Area rapidly. And this was one of the first modules they built. You can see it's got these beautiful big sweeping curves. And it was based on a prototype location, Franklin Canyon on the Santa Fe Railroad, circa mid-1990s. Greg went out and took pictures, and he tried to build everything to the prototype. The track plan is to the prototype. There's things have been compressed because, well, you know, we're modelers, we do that. But, you know, like this fence in the foreground, if you were to go out there at Franklin Canyon in the mid-1990s, that's the fence that was at that location next to that spur track, that type of fence. And so he built the fence to match what was there, very close to the prototype. In fact, I've been at setups up in the Bay Area, which is near where this is, and had at a Anna Marie convention. Sorry, my cat is climbing on my shoulder and he's giving me a problem. There we go. And had people walk up and look at it and go, "This is Franklin Canyon, isn't it?" And, you know, and so there's an underpass there. And again, he built it and looked at what was there. And it's a 1,200 square foot passing siding. Very useful in the early days before we started doing more double track modules. I'm not sure if this module exists anymore. This was built by Ron Wilcox. It's loosely based on Wilcox, Arizona. Ron wanted to resemble it, but he wanted a denser traffic, so he adjusted it some so that it would work better for what he wanted. So it's loosely based on it. But you can see some of the type detail that goes into Freee-mo modules. These are modules, they move and they transport around. His emphasis was on switching, so he had a lot of switching stuff. Watsonville Junction. Watsonville Junction's on the coastline in California, the SP coastline in California up near Santa Cruz. And this module has actually been built, taken apart, and a new one built, because we built the whole thing on foam and we were very disappointed the foam was moving. We had problems with the track, things weren't working right because of that. And we ended up just scrapping the whole thing and starting over. And the new module is much better, and we laid the new module out much closer to the prototype. We've got a yard ladder that's using number 8 turnouts, and the yard ladder is almost 18 feet long, just the ladder. It's just wonderful. You know, and this is some of the detail we put into it. Again, you know, we went out and took pictures of this somewhat unique telephone pole that's in Watsonville Junction, and we put it where it belonged on the tracks in Watsonville Junction to help set the scene and make it feel like Watsonville. This is Shandon Loop. This is another very early Freee-mo module, still out there, still working, by Gary Green up in Santa Cruz. When they were starting Freee-mo in the Bay Area back in the late 90s, Franklin Canyon was built. Gary Green built this module. A couple other guys built some other modules because they wanted a return loop. And so these are all pictures off his module. It was interesting what he did. He, you know, tried to design the throat area. Let me back up. The throat area with the Y in it so that it was somewhat prototypical, and tried to make it feel like if you didn't have the loop around behind it, it was a junction. And he did a really nice job of that. And then around the loop, he went and found a mountain, looked at a topographical map, picked out a spot, and then used the topographical profile up and down and basically laid it out on the module. And that's how he built the topography of the module as it ran around in the loop so that it would feel real, because he didn't think he could make it feel real without that type of help. It was an interesting way to do it. Freee-mo allows for realistic operation. In fact, you have to operate your train as Freee-mo. You don't have a choice, because you can't just turn it on and let it run, because it's not a round and round and round. There's a lot of single track main lines, so you have to pay attention to the other people that are out there and stop and let people pass. To me, it makes your running your trains more fun, makes it more like a home layout and doing stuff. You know, normal conventional modules set up for continuous running. You know, how many times have you been to a convention and the trains are just going around in a circle and the people inside are just sitting in chairs, not paying attention and talking unless something goes wrong? They're not really operating their trains. They're just sitting there yakking and watching the trains go in a circle. And I don't have a problem with that. That's just not for me. DCC and Freee-mo is a good mix. It lets you do helpers and all the good stuff that you can do with it. Powered turnouts are more robust under heavy sessions and more resilient than hand throws. You also have to think about one of the rules in the standards is that you have to be able to operate your turnouts from both sides. Now, a module's 24 inches wide, so 12 inches in, or if you've got a yard ladder, it might be 24 inches away. And do you really want somebody like me with big, fat, clumsy fingers reaching into the middle of your module to try and throw the hand throw and banging into your details because you maybe have switch stands, or you might have speed markers or station names and other roadside signs and details. And as I do that, my shirt sleeve hangs down and catches your scenery on the other side as I'm reaching across. So it's a better idea to have powered. Keep people from having to reach into your module, but it's not required to have powered. It's just required that you can operate it from either side. And if you're comfortable with people reaching across your module to throw a turnout with a hand throw, that works. We do a lot of dispatching through FRS handheld radios. I've seen it used and not used at many of the setups I've been to. Usually when we have dispatcher, it's because, you know, there's some mainline in there and they're not really telling you what to do, but they're helping control the traffic so you know who's coming, who you're following, who's following you, when you can get onto the single track and run. It kind of feels good. And then we've got signals too. Now it's not part of the standard. It's called MSS, Modular Signal System, that a lot of people in Freee-mo have adopted. It was designed by somebody in Freee-mo for Freee-mo, and it's plug and play. When it's installed and set up correctly, you plug modules together and it just works. It's basically an ABS, automatic block signaling system, and it can be really something. Research. So when you go to build your module, you're going to do research. You're going to search the internet. You're going to look at books. You're going to go out rail fanning. You're going to gather all that information together. And you're going to look at old maps to try or new maps and figure out what you're building and looking at your prototype location and come up with your module and decide how it's going to look. Okay, so setting up. First thing we do is we have accurate dimensions of the room. So whoever's hosting goes out and measures the facility, finds all the obstacles, so there won't be any surprises. We find out where the power connections are, so where we're going to be able to get electricity. This was for a Santa Fe Historical Society convention in Pasadena one year, way back in 2005. And that was drawn with the available space, and then everybody supplies accurate drawings of their modules to the run chief, and they start piecing together the modules to design the layout. Another thing you have to think is how you're going to get there. Divide and conquer, so many modules, so little time. This was Chris Palomares' truck going to a setup we went to in Oakland. He had 22 modules in the back of his truck. Thankfully, it was clear weather, no rain, because that could have been a disaster. This is not the way we like to transport modules, but it has happened and it might happen again someday. This is Jesus Pena built a North Bay module, and he had this beast we call the mothership. He just moved to Florida, so I'm not sure what he did with the mothership. I think it went to Florida with him. He was doing the North Bay in San Francisco Peninsula, the North Bay Intermodal Facility. And so that beast is 6 feet long, 52 or 50 inches off the ground is the height. And it's got shelves in it that hold, I forget if it's 3 or 4 other module pieces. So this gets rolled up into the back of this little pickup he had, or rolled out, rolls into the venue. And then you pull the modules out and set them up on either end of it. And it became a 32-foot long module, I think it was. It was or is a beast. Think about what you're going to build and how it's going to fit. This is a beautiful example of how somebody really planned how their modules fit into their van to transport. A lot of guys use pickup trucks, or a lot of people rent trailers or own trailers and transport stuff in trailers. Kevin, do you know how many trailers we had show up at Elk City? You're on mute, Kevin.
I think about 8 or 9. There was quite a few.
Yeah, that was a really big setup we just did. But again, setting up you've got the room, you start having the modules, you set up the modules first, get them up and on their feet. Again, you arrange them in the proper order. Then you start leveling them. Depending on what part of the country you're in, because there are different people using different methods to level their modules. Some are worrying about it more than others. In California, we do not follow the floor because we've had so many problems with the floors that just go up and down and all over the place. So we try to put the modules in a plane. Then you start clamping the modules together. And then you install your fitter rails and repeat. And you just you level a module, clamp it in, fitter rails, level a module, clamp it on, fitter rails. And the module and the layout just starts growing. Divided into DC blocks into booster blocks for the DCC control. Then you add scenery items, cars, vehicles, and buildings. And some people have removable trees that they start putting on. And the engine and rolling stock come on last. That's the last thing we put on. So I'm just going to show some pictures of showing some of the detail of Freee-mo modules so you get an idea of what people out there have been doing I believe the upper right, left, and upper left and lower left are all on Franklin Canyon on Glen Fraser. I don't know the lower right module. That's actually North Bay on the left. I'm not sure which one that is on the right. I know I recognize it. I've seen it and run on it. Here's some from St. Louis. To me, just a beautiful module. The whole junkyard scene just really sets it off for me. Some more modules. You can see the variety. Rochester Institute of Technology has a club, a train club that's using Freee-mo now. This is one of their first setups that they set up with their modules. Some of the pictures from their modules. You can see all the buildings and I mean, it's just, to me, it's amazing what people will actually do on their modules sometimes. We don't define the fascia color. The fascia color is defined as blending in with, or I forget the exact word we use, but we don't tell you what color because different clubs in different regions like different colors. And in California, we have a very dry, late spring, early summer tone to our modules. So we have a beige color on it. Up in Canada, where they have real green modules, they have a green, they paint their sides green. You can see here, this module group in this area, they like the black sides. So everybody does something a little different. And some of our friends in Minnesota. You know, I love that building in the top left. I've seen pictures of that a bunch of times. I finally got to see that in January. And then somebody showed me the picture of the real building, and it's almost a perfect match to the real building. It's actually, there's an actual building painted that way at that location. It's beautiful. Just really, you know, if you know that area, when you see that, you know exactly what it is. Here was Alberta, Canada, set up from 2006. There's one of those modules that has multiple ends. This was in Riverside, Santa Fe Convention. That was California and Utah. The loop at the very top and the big curve in the upper right-hand corner came in from Utah. You can see on the right-hand side that there's like a big black asphalty area where the module is really wide. That's the North Bay module set I was talking about. It's got 2 of its 4 expanders on it. But that's the big beast. This here, actually, Niles Canyon, California, in the Fremont area. This was one of my favorite setups I've ever been to. It was incredibly small, a loop. You see just a couple modules there, and the gentlemen you see at the far end are standing at the yard module, which is this yard. So that loop's just on the other side of that wall there. And it was just a lot of fun going out and back. It was they had just finished rebuilding the freight station there, and they were turning it into a museum, and they invited us up for their open house, and we set up as a part of the attraction for their open house. I don't know what they've done. This whole area was supposed to be, and was in the planning stages, to have a model railroad built into it. So we ran there before they built the railroad. Elk City, Oklahoma. This was just in January, we were in a 22,000 square foot facility. So you can see how big this room is, and that's people slowly starting to move their stuff in and starting to set up and have most of it set up at this point. It was 22,000 square feet. We had 18 scale miles of track, over 18. I think it was 18 and a half. Very impressive setup. I didn't even end up running on the whole thing. I didn't realize it till I got home that I'd missed a whole leg, going out onto a whole leg, because it was just, I mean, you can see how complex it is. There's 3 return loops. I don't know how many junctions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 junctions on it. So there was just all these branches. It was so much fun to run on this layout. It was a real blast. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm just
On the ends of the modules, you have some method of not clamping, but of aligning and making sure that they fit together, like a little board that sticks out and the 2 boards would.
Nope. What you have is 2 flat surfaces, and you bring them together, and then you adjust the 2 modules. And when you get them right, you put a C-clamp underneath them and clamp them together. That way you're not relying on the quality of either person's build being, if somebody doesn't get something exactly perfect, you could be in real trouble if you do that alignment. We've had a lot of talk about, and people have tried doing some things with pins, and I've seen some success and some failures, and most of the people that I've seen that use pins interfaces leave some slop in them so they can micro adjust them. And so we're just trying to like, well, why go to the trouble to put in the pins if I'm leaving the slop to micro adjust them?
Understand.
You can use pins between your own sections like I do. Jacob and I have done that. They work really well. As long as you do it right the first time, they just go right together, and you don't have to worry about that slop or adjustment because everything fits up just right.
Absolutely. A lot of people use pins on their internal joints where you're controlling both sides of it. Absolutely. And again, that's because on that internal joint, you can do almost anything you want because it's an internal joint. Your tracks don't even have to go across it square. They can go across at an angle because, again, it's not a Freee-mo end. Freee-mo, when you talk about Freee-mo, you don't talk about a piece of the module, or when you talk about a module, it's not a single piece. When you talk about a module, it's whatever it is from Freee-mo end to Freee-mo end, whether that's 1 piece or 17 pieces.
Yeah. The other issue
depending on what they build.
Sorry, Bob.
Go ahead.
The other issue with pins is that there's so many different varieties out there, and everybody across the country does what they think or what they have, and there's just no compatibility with them.
Yeah. I've even seen some stuff about some guys that are doing 1-inch steel pipe for pins, and they talk about taking their calipers into the hardware store and going through the bin of pipes until they find the one that's actually the right diameter, because there's variations in the manufacturing of the diameter of the steel pipes.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. There's a group on Facebook called Freee-mo, and that's Tim Moran, I think is his name.
Yes, it is.
And anyway, it's taken Freee-mo, and basically it's like Freee-mo and the Sipping and Switching Society. They have a end with the pins in it, combining it together to have fast locking things. And then he has an adapter section that goes from the Freee-mo to the flat Freee-mo end to make it work. But you have to have see if maybe I can share this real quick. To do that, you have to have a template. So if anybody's seeing this here.
No, you're not sharing yet. Let me stop my share.
Oh, okay.
Now try your share. There you go. Now you're sharing.
Yeah. Okay. So you have to have this template for that. And of course, I'm on the Freee-mo group, and they were doing a thing where he had just took in a bunch of orders at the time and had a machine shop cut these things. So I went ahead and bought one. Just thought maybe I might build some modules with it. These little notches up here are for like rail alignment, and they're I think they're 2-inch centers on that. So and the Sipping and Switching Society is a little different because I think you can run tracks on both sides of the module instead of down. I think you can do down the center, but they're both sides as well. And then the curves are a little bit different as well. So But
Yeah, they don't have the sipping and switching society. As much as I've tried, they don't have a standard that they will share. It's just they just. I've tried to get them to, because I wanted to learn more about their standard, and they just flat out don't have a standard that they share. And and when asking about like curve radius, they're like, oh, you make whatever you want. I'm like, but not everything will run it well. And then Johnny's got this whatever train, it's some passenger car train, and if his train will run across it, then it's a main line, and if it won't, then we call it a branch line module. I'm like, they're a little bit too loose for me.
What is I've attended the conventions for the Dallas area and Plano multiple times, and the modular setups that they have for the various HO layouts. What is the real difference between those modules and this Freee-mo?
Well, there's two different there's three different types of module layouts that I can think of. One is there's a layout and it's these 7 pieces or however many, and they come together and make this one layout. And it's a layout that comes apart into pieces, goes away, and every time it sets up, they set up the exact same layout every time because it's built as a module set of a set of modules that come together to make a layout.
Okay, and then the scenery is the same. Okay,
yeah, their scenery is continuous because they basically just think that they took a layout and cut it into pieces and turned it into modules.
Okay.
And then there's your NMRA style, which are going to be the racetrack loops. They've got 4 corners and straights in between the 4 corners, and they usually have 3 tracks on the outside edge, and they have a backdrop on the inside, and you can do whatever you want kind of in the middle, but you have to have those 2 or 3 tracks running around down the outside edge. And then Freee-mo, we're much, we're freer on some ways, but we're strict on the other end, that we want you to do a prototype looking scene with prototype looking scenery and prototype practices, but then you can do whatever you want. Because when we get back to this, it doesn't matter what angle your corner is, because we're never trying to close the loop. Now I say that, but I've seen us close the loop more than once and do some special things to close the loop, or the things just worked out that way. But in general, you're doing a point to point. So, and you can see on the bottom right corner there, this yard ended up not making it, but there's 2 yards on the bottom right-hand corner. And you'll notice that scale, that's like 70 feet of yard that was there, 2 yards end to end that was supposed to be 70 feet long, and then a branch going out, and then a branch going up to the return loop. And then there was as you move over towards the left, there's that junction module with the branch, and it came back, and that big section in the middle is Dallas Union Terminal, and it was like the centerpiece, and a branch going off to one end to a loop, and a branch going off the other way to a loop with a bunch of other branches, and it's just all these branching. So what? It's 7 feet long. So what? It's 7.5 feet long. So what? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can find my way back to where we were.
What's the biggest setup to date that you know of?
That one in Elk City at 22,000 square feet with 18 point something scale miles of mainline track.
Wow.
Again, these are just, I'm going to go through these a little bit faster. If I go too fast, tell me to back up. These are just some detailed pictures of things people have built. Hopefully when you're looking at these, you get the feeling you're looking at somebody's home layout, not some module that they haul around in the back of a truck.
How do you go about protecting like the all the scenery and details on the top?
Everybody's got something different. Locally here, we started building what we call coffins, and what we have is 6 sides. And so we literally take the modules down, and then we build a box around it. So now it's in a crate with 6 sides, 4 sides, a top and a bottom. and then we can stack those crates up inside a trailer, and they're not going to hurt each other. We can keep the modules flat. A lot of people roll them on their sides, but if you roll something like this module on its side, a lot of that detail is going to shake out driving down the road. So I'm guarantee this one stands upright. People have built rolling racks, kind of like table or chair type racks with shelves on them that they slide their modules into and use a C-clamp or some other way to secure it onto it, and then roll the rack up into the back of a trailer. Just use your imagination, because that's what people are doing.
Yeah, the crates make it more efficient to load in a trailer. Jake and I, when we've moved our modules before, he's starting to crate his, I'm going to crate mine, but from January 2023 going back to January 2022, between the two setups, we had a lot easier time loading everything, and we were concerned because we got a smaller trailer this past year, but it didn't matter because so much was crated that we were able to put everything more efficiently and have space left over. So in addition to protecting, it's sure makes making good use of space. It really helps in that regard.
Yeah, crates take up a little bit more space because you got this big crate around it, and it's tall enough to meet all your scenery. But crates mean that you can stack stuff together better and use the space better. So it's a right hand shake, left hand shake. Yeah. I love this picture because I say that there's no gimmicks and things like that, but it's a prototypical scene. This really crazy details that people put on their Freee-mo modules. They're just some beautiful modules out there. That's this one here. I love this picture. This one almost feels real to me. But that's a 1/87 scale model. So links. I'll come back to these links before we're done, because I'm going to go into some frequently asked questions type stuff. I've got 4 or 5 slides of frequently asked questions of people ask about the standards. The first link there, freemo.org, that's where you'll find the official standard, the standard, and other information about Freee-mo. Freee-mo's not a club. A lot of people like to say we're a group of like-minded individuals, and there are clubs that do Freee-mo, but Freee-mo in itself is not a club. There's nothing to join. There's no membership dues. It's follow the standards and build to the standards and come and play with us. That's really what it comes down to. There's a groups.io email list that there's a fair amount of talk on, and that link is there. And I'll bring this page back up at the very end. And then if you look on Facebook, there's a lot of Facebook groups, because a lot of different organizations out there that do Freee-mo have their own Facebook pages. This one is the most generic, just Freee-mo model railroading. And that's probably the best one of the Facebook groups. There is another Freee-mo Facebook group that actually I started, and I started it as an organization group, and it didn't work right. And even if you go there, it'll say, go to this one and point over to it. Common questions. Standards are the minimum to build to. S1.2, the second line of standards is interoperability. We try to limit the standards down to only the things that matter for interoperability and to make things work right. There's a few things that talk about prototypical and for look, like the ballast color. But that's one of the very few things. We don't talk about fascia color. We don't talk about wire color. We don't talk about how to build your module, because we don't care how you build it. Here's the standard, build it to meet the standard, and you're going to be okay. S versus RP, you'll see S's and RPs, standards and recommended practices. When there's things like the 42 inches, the standard for the minimum radius, we used to have a 36-inch radius. We, as a group across the nation, voted to up it to 42 inches. And we also had a large group of people that would like to have seen it bigger. So we did a recommended practice of 48. We really recommend a 48-inch radius curve. 42 is our minimum. But so you're going to see things like that in the standards. Wire color code, I already talked about that. We don't have one. Okay, these next ones work together, and this is one of the biggest confusing things for people. 50-inch height radius. So our standard height is 50-inch. That's where we normally set up at. But we also say that your end of your module has to be able to be adjustable in your module in 3/4 inch increments. But that's because there's another line, S2.7, that says your maximum height is 62 inches. Now, you're like saying, but the standard height is 50, but the maximum height is 62. That's because we allow a 2% grade. Now, I'll be honest, I have yet to see anybody build a grade module, especially one that goes all the way up to 62 inches. But that's because it takes about 3 feet of module to come from a flat and level module and get into a 2% grade. It'll take another 3 feet of module to slope back out of a grade. And then for every 3 feet of module, you can go up 3/4 of an inch. So it takes almost a 9-foot module to go up 3/4 of an inch. And then for every 3 more feet you add onto it, it's going to go up another 3/4 of an inch. But if you wanted to build the Tehachapi loop, Freee-mo, within the Freee-mo specifications, you can do it. I've designed the benchwork to do that. I designed the frame because I was interested and wanted to bang that out with my head. And you can get the right height. And so as a modular owner, you potentially have to set your module up at 62 inches off the ground. Some people are also going to say, why did you go 50 inches high? That's too high for kids to see. Well, to be honest, Freee-mo is building modules for me to play with and for you to play with, and the kids are a bonus. I also like to get down and look into my modules at eye level. You'll notice most of those pictures that were in here, not all of them were taken by beam, but a lot of them are taken from the vantage point of a 6-foot tall human standing on the module looking across it, because it just makes it look so much more real instead of like you're looking from a helicopter. No, you do not have to come back down. That's one of the biggest problems. People say, oh, the 2%, you have to come up and come back down to be back at 50 inches. No. S2.7 says that you can end up as high as 62 inches in 3/4 inch increments from 50 inches. So the two ends of your module, you can have one at 50 and one at 51.5 because you went up 1.5 inches, or 53 or 56 because you built a grade. So you've got someplace, your prototype has a grade on it, you can build that grade in Freee-mo.
So does that mean that we all need 62-inch legs on our modules, or the capability of going that high?
Yep. And so there's been a lot of discussion of most people have screw feet. You buy them from Lee Valley, or they'll use eye bolts, or they'll use carriage bolts that are 4 or 5 inches long. So they actually get 3 to 4 inches of screw height. People have designed leg extenders that they can put onto the bottom of their legs. Other people, the concept was 3/4 of an inch is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. So you can have a stack of 3 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood that you stack up to lift the module up into the air. Getting enough of those to go 12 feet is going to be scary. But I've designed a box of, the Russian dolls where the little doll goes inside of the bigger doll inside of the bigger, and they all stack together. I designed a set of risers that are a little over 2 feet wide, or 2 feet wide, that stack together like that you can take apart and stack on top of each other to make a pyramid. So the bottom one is about 8 or 10 inches wide, and the top one's 2 inches wide, and you could make a pyramid of pieces stacked up to put your module on to raise it up and get that 12 inches of height. But technically and theoretically, yes. In my 20 years, I haven't seen anybody make a grade module yet. I'm waiting. I'm excited to see it. Because have you ever been to a train show where they actually have a grade in a module set?
No.
Have you ever seen anybody bring the Tehachapi loop as a module into a setup, into a convention? Wouldn't that just be awesome? So people often ask, why do you have to have a 6 inches straight at the end of your curve? That just makes the curve look funny, and it doesn't look right, especially if you put 2 curves in a reversing curve. They look funny with that straight, or you hook them together into bigger curves and straight and curves and straight. Well, first, the prototype almost never has just a perfect curve. Their curves are getting wider and skinnier and have straight spots in them all the time. Second, that 6 inches, though, comes back down to S3.9, which is if you're going to have reversing curves, you have to have 12 inches of straight track between them. Well, by having 6 inches on each end of every curve module, or every module, if you take 2 curve modules and you put them together as a reversing curve, all of a sudden you've got that 12 inches of straight track between your 2 curves, and everything's hunky-dory. Module versus module set, we've talked quite a bit about that. Freee-mo ends versus internal joints, we've talked about that. Freee-mo, and Freee-mo, they're not the same. Freee-mo, F-R-E-M-O, is a European standard, mostly in Germany, or it started in Germany in 1981. It's the Friendships of European Railway Modelers is what Freee-mo stands for. And that was where Chris Palomares got the idea for Freee-mo from. Freee-mo is the North American or American standard, because if we go up into, I think we've got some people in South America doing Freee-mo. That was started in 1994, so roughly 13 years later. And then Freemo no dash is an NMR British regional standard, started in 2011. It's very similar to Freee-mo, but it's been Britishized, so it's all in metric, and there's some other differences, and they've made some changes that fit what they need to do over in Great Britain. And then there's Speed-mo, which we talked about a little bit, which is a combination of Freee-mo and the Sipping and Switching Society standards. And it's taking their end plate design and putting it on Freee-mo. Speed-mo also doesn't have, or they didn't, I don't know if they've changed it, they didn't have any minimum radiuses, they didn't care. They didn't have minimum turnout sizes. You have to have wheels on the bottom of your legs so that you can roll your module down, which is not a bad idea. It's an excellent idea. It was a great addition. They have the standardized end plate. They also don't have grades. They took out grades now. No one's ever built a grade module, but it's in our standards and it's available. And we're just waiting for somebody that has a trailer that wants to make a 10 or 15 module set to make a grade go up. I take it back. We do have a grade. I mean, there was a grade at the Elk City, but it went up and came back down. We don't have a grade that goes up and stays up yet. Mainline versus branch line versus Minimo. Got some capital and some lowercase verses in there. Need to adjust that. Mainline. So everything I've been talking about is mainline standards. We have a subset of the Freee-mo standards, which makes some changes to some minor things. It changes the minimum radius from 42 to 36, changes the grade from 2% to 4%. It changes the rail down to code 70, I believe. And there's one or two other things in it. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it was designed so that people could build, because people were complaining that, hey, I want to build this branch line location, and those curves are just too big for the branch line location. Or this branch line has steeper grades in it. I want to do a logging railroad or something, and so we came up with it. And if you look at our standards, you'll walk down and it'll say same as the standard. Here's a change, and it only lists out the changes to the standard to make it a branch line module. Now, the danger of making a branch line module is that at a setup, you're either going to get thrown out onto a branch, which isn't necessarily bad, or they might say, I'm sorry, we're doing only mainline modules. There aren't a lot of people that do branch line modules, but there was some people asked for it, so we made sure we got it in there. And then Minimo was created because there were some people that are like, I want to have some modules that are really skinny and small for use in my garage. And so we created a Minimo to help them get around, making some really small, skinny, tight corners and other things like that. But then they also said, but I want to scenic them fully and I want to bring them to setups maybe. And a lot of people are like, well, that module won't be welcome at my setup. And so again, if you make something that's it's a non-standard module that still conforms to all the track work, but the frame doesn't meet the standard. Is what a Minimo really is. Mainline, branch line, Minimo. Then we also have what we call a signal mo. people that have been doing the signaling are making modules that are as short as 2 inches. It's a module that's only 2 inches long, 24 inches wide by 2 inches long. It has a pair of signals on it that you can clamp in between 2 other modules to add a signal when you're doing the MSS signaling and put a signal where you need it. Most people usually make those about 6 to 8 inches wide, but I've seen them as skinny as 2 inches. MSS, I've talked about saying it is not required, but more and more people are using it all the time. Here's a question we get asked way too often. I've got a bunch of Atlas Code 100 Flex Track. I want to use it on my module, so I can transition from Code 83 to Code 100, right? And it's like, no. Well, okay, so I'm building a yard or some spurs, and I'll just put the Code 100 in the spurs. No. You cannot use Code 100. Code 83 is the largest track you can use on a module. Now, I'm going to tell you that there is somebody out there, I don't know who they are, but they would be able to get away with Code 100 track, and that's if they were doing the Pensy, where they had the heavier rail, and they're trying to build to their prototype. But I haven't had anybody actually try and pull that card on us yet. Through track versus spurs versus industries. A lot of the pieces of the standard talk about the through tracks. So the through track is a track that goes from one end to the other end. Now, if you have a 2-to-1 module, that's going to be both tracks on that. If you have a double track module, it's both tracks. But as soon as you run off onto the spur or down onto an industry track and it becomes a dead end track that a train can't go through to the other end, you can start doing other stuff and do tighter curves and things like that around your buildings and down into your industries, because that's what the real railroad did. But the through track's got to be able to handle brass passenger cars, big boys, large steam engines, auto racks, all that big equipment, as well as other box cars and stuff. It's got to be able to run everything or anything that somebody might bring to a setup. And that's where we get into the bigger curves and the big turnouts and stuff. But once you go down into your industry and you're building a whole little industry that's got a dead end spur, you can go down to number 4 turnouts if you wanted. You've got to try and keep with what the prototype would do is what we'd like, but there is a difference between a spur, an industry, and a through track. Accessory bus. We have an accessory bus and it is AC. And if you want to use it and power something DC, you're going to have to put a little converter, an AC to DC converter in it, bridge rectifier, and a little regulator. Its design is so that if you're building a module and you've got just one turnout on it and one tortoise, you don't have to bring a power supply with you. You can power it off the accessory bus. If you're building a yard and you're going to have 5 or 6 or 8 switch machines on your thing, you should probably build a power supply that's special and separate just for your module. It's really there for that light use, or you maybe have some lights that you want to have on your module or things like that. But if you're powering any volume of stuff, you're going to want to build your own power in it. Throttle jacks. There are some people out there that think that throttle jacks should be thrown away because everybody in the world does wireless. Well, I can tell you that I was just in Elk City with 60 modelers, and a whole bunch of them were plugging in all the time and weren't using wireless. So we've had a lot of discussion about how small of a module needs to have a throttle jack. If you've got a module that's only 3 feet long, do you really have to have a throttle jack on it? And it's like, well, no, because you're going to have a throttle jack to your left and your right on the other 2 modules. But what happens when 4 or 5 of those 3-foot long modules get hooked together in a row at a setup? All of a sudden, you've got 12 or 15 feet without a throttle jack. What about, I've got this big module set that's this big 35-foot long yard, Watsonville Junction. And it's every side of your module. So technically, that's 2 throttle jacks, 1 on each side. Not every section, every side of your module. And since a module is Freee-mo end, if you put 2 throttle jacks on that, 1 on each side, you've met the standard. Now let's talk practicality. You're probably going to want a throttle jack where your yard lead is and down through your ladder. And if you've got a double-ended yard or you've got switching going on at the other end, you're probably going to want a throttle jack down there too. So you're going to want to place the throttle jacks where they're needed, where people are going to be standing and doing switching and stuff. If you've just got straight tracks running through your module, a throttle jack on each side, you're good to go. People have also started making clamp-on throttle jacks so they can add them as needed. Throttle jack track power. A lot of people like to hook the track power up to the UP5 throttle jack so they get the little status light on the front, but that also puts a little bit of a drain on the track. And all of a sudden, with as many throttle jacks as we have, if everybody does that, that takes a fair amount of current and starts pulling on it. On top of that, if you're building a module and you're putting the MSS signaling bus into your track, it's going to see that drain and think there's a train. So you got to make sure that if you do wire that in, you wire it outside and of the current detector. So it's a thing. Maintenance and upkeep to the standards. With as much detail as people put on their Freee-mo modules, when they move, things break. Scenery breaks, details break, they're fragile. You need to make sure how are you going to transport this thing? How are you going to get it to and from setups? And how are you going to maintain it? You know, if you start getting too many modules and too much stuff, you have the time and energy to keep it up to snuff and keep it looking good. Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of groups out there, if your modules start to look shabby because things are getting broken and not repaired, when they do a setup, they're not going to include your module in the setup. And we talked about turnout controls on both sides already. And here are those 3 links again. And that's what I had to talk about. Hopefully I didn't bore you guys.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So I think it was Dennis Rice, you were asking, what is Freee-mo? Did I answer that question? Quality of
You did
quality.
a very excellent job.
So hopefully you know now the difference between us and something like N-track or standard modules or a modular layout. Oh, love to see you guys join us. I'm sure
Yeah.
Kevin would. He'd love more people in Texas to play with.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll add a couple things about our experience. This was the third Freee-mo setup we organized. The first one was by Northeast Mall here in Fort Worth. The second one, we had to go up to Gainesville. And the third one, we ended up at Elk City. And that's one of the problems with Freee-mo is finding the space to do a big setup. You know, a lot of these places we've been before, like in vacant stores at a mall, property owners don't want to talk to us anymore about that. Gainesville was booked. And we actually ended up at Elk City by accident. And how we ended up there is that's where Jacob Dameron is from. And so he went back home to visit his parents and then saw the convention center there and inquired about it. And we had ourselves a site. And that turned out to be a stroke of luck because we had, you know, just a great turnout of over 40 people with over 100 modules, and we filled up all 22,000 square feet. So that's one of the things to always keep in mind is that the bigger you are, the harder it's going to be to find a place to do it. But at this point, we figure Elk City is going to be our permanent home from now on because we feel like we're going to get really good participation from this point on.
It also, Elk City worked out really well. I mean, it seems like it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it kind of is. I don't know if you guys know where Elk City is. It's west of Oklahoma City, halfway to the border. But when you put a pin in Elk City and you start drawing circles around it, it's not that far from Colorado and Arizona. And yeah, California is a bit of a drive, but I drove out there, it wasn't that far. Coming up out of Texas, we had people coming down from Chicago and Kansas and
Minnesota, Canada.
And a couple guys came down out of Canada. So we had, you know, it was in a geographical center location that really, the snow was a problem. The weather was a problem for a couple of people, but physically it's a really good, almost central area. And I don't know about you guys, but that same facility in California would have cost us easy $1,500 a day. And I think it cost us $1,500 for the whole weekend.
Yeah, 1750. Elk City
Okay.
compared to Gainesville, we had 3 times the space for 1/3 the cost.
So when y'all do that, do y'all just like every member that's coming just chip in a little bit to
Yeah.
cover the cost of that?
Yeah, and everybody's willing. We're all in it together, and I've never had a problem of somebody refusing to pay or not paying. Everybody's been really good about that.
Yeah, and a bit on that, we've come down. There's 2 types of setups. There's pay to play, which is what that was, and there's some place where we get free space, which is usually at a train show. But a lot of train shows want to start charging to come in and set up a modular layout in their space for their train show, because they're like, well, if you're not here, we're going to sell it to vendors and we're going to get money from the vendors. So we need you to pay for it. And it's like, yeah, but me being there is an attraction for people to come to your train show that want to see trains running that aren't really, so there's a real give and take. When you're at a public show, you're limited hours. You come and go when they tell you to. When you're in a pay to play, we had 24/7 access. Yeah, we weren't there for 7 days, but we had 24 hours a day access. We could have stayed all night if we wanted. I think people were there till midnight every night, and there were people in there by 7 or 8 in the morning every morning.
Yeah, not all venues give you that access, but Elk City, it just welcomed us with open arms. The only thing we had to keep telling us is that this is not open to the public, because word spread very quickly through town that, hey, there's this neat model train set up, and everywhere I go, people are asking about it. Hey, can we come see it? Is it open to the public? And we just had to say no, and finally put some signs on the doors. This is a private event.
Yeah, and that's tough because we didn't put up our skirting. When a public show, we usually put skirts on, so we didn't put skirts on. So quite literally, there were tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, rolling stock, engines, tools just sitting in open boxes and open toolboxes underneath the modules all around the facility, and nobody cared because we're all Freee-mo and we're all trained modelers. We all know the value, and we all trusted each other. As soon as you start letting the public in, it comes really sketchy on that piece.
One of the issues
Go ahead.
One of the issues of not letting the public in is that you're now not gaining new people interested in the hobby.
Absolutely. But that's the difference between going to that's why we still go to public shows as well as pay to play shows. And you've got to play both. You can't do just pay to play because of that problem. And we don't like to go to just NMRA conventions. I love to go to them because we're displaying to the right people. We're displaying to modelers. But you have limited time. You're in with the vendors, and when they close that door for the vendors and they close the NTS down for the night, everybody's got to leave, period. Nobody gets to stay behind because the vendors are worried about all their hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff on the table. And quite honestly, it costs $1,000 or $2,000 when I drive from California to Kansas City to go to the NMRA convention. By the time I've spent 2 or 3 nights on the road at hotels and a hotel there for a week and then driving back, the cost adds up. And so you start really up here, what do I get versus, wow, I go to the pay to play show and I've got a ton of stuff going on and I get a ton of time and I don't have to worry about the public. Mm-hmm. But then I'm not advertising to the public. So it's a balance.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the design of the layout, there were a lot of places where we just didn't have very wide space between the wall and the edge of the layout, so we couldn't accommodate a bunch of people. And plus, it really just wasn't much of a free flow all the way around the layout. So, to go to certain places, you end up at a dead end. You've got to go back out and so forth. So, all our setups have pretty much been that way, where we're filling up the space and, just for people walking around, there's a high risk of things getting damaged or lost. And the other thing is that at these setups. They're invite only, and everybody comes to run trains. So the whole idea is let's set up quickly as possible. Let's get running, and we do invite a few special guests. The director of the facility. We let her husband, her family come to see it. We had some guys that work for Farm Rail that came in, and we let them walk around and everything. That was really cool. And so it's not like we're completely shutting out people, but we'll allow certain people or invited guests to come and see the layout operate.
Basically, the rule of thumb is that if you were to meet somebody or know somebody or see somebody that expressed interest, you can escort them around the layout, but you have to be with them the entire time they're in the layout. And then you have to escort them to the door and when they leave. The other thing is that the fire marshal is going to look at us differently if we're open to the public or not. And I don't know how the Elk City fire marshal is. California, especially in some of the bigger venues, the fire marshals can be real tight on their rules, and other ones don't even look at us. And you never know what it's going to be like going into a venue, what the fire marshal is going to say.
And insurance becomes another factor too then.
We have the NRA insurance policy, so that helps there. This is something we do talk about before each setup. We take it to a vote, and some people are in favor of it, but most people just assume that we keep it a private event.
Yeah, and mostly the people that want to keep it a private event, they're not trying to be dicks. They're trying to be worried. They're worried about they know the extra steps they need to go through if we're going to make it a public event, and they just like, oh, I just don't want to go through that hassle. I need to make sure I close everything up and not lock, but make sure all my toolboxes are closed. And it's, to be honest, it's not so much people trying to steal our stuff as it is a little kid seeing something shiny and picking it up and walking away, and they get in the car and they're driving home with mom, and mom's like, what's that you've got? Oh, this cool little car I found. Where'd you find it? I don't know. And somebody lost some kind of a, maybe it was I can't think of the name, but the old metal scale car that's irreplaceable. And they're not going to go walking out with a car in their hand.
Yeah, there have been plenty of horror stories of people actually seeing a stationary locomotive and trying to push it and ask, why isn't this engine moving? And they're just going back and forth with it. It's like, our stuff is too valuable to allow that to happen.
You also have a problem with people coming in and going like this to the buttons on the side of the layout. What does this button do? What does this button do? What does this button do? And all of a sudden, the brass engine with a brass passenger train behind it turns down a turnout and heads towards the edge of the layout and runs into somebody else's equipment, and bam, it's not pretty.
Yeah. Some of the worst offenders really get mad when you tell them to stop too. And, it really isn't a pleasant thing to have to do.
Yeah.
One question I had was, I know Digitrax is like the standard. Where do you see LCC, as it's developed and comes along? Do you think that'll replace the Digitrax as that, or?
So I bite my tongue as you say LCC. I have nothing against LCC. I think LCC is an excellent thing. The problem is LCC, everything has to be programmed. Everything has to be set up. Everything on Freee-mo is plug and play. You set the modules down, you hook them together, you plug it together, and it goes. There is no configuration. The module signal system, a brilliant design by Greg Furman. It's got its limitations, no doubt about it. It's got limitations, 100%. But you plug it together and it works. You don't have to do any configuration. It just starts working. Yeah. If it's all built correctly to the specs, which some people have trouble following the specs, which I understand because it can be kind of complex, especially if you're just doing a piece, if you're just putting detection in your module, it's very simple and it's only costs about $30 or $40. As soon as you try to add a signal on, if anybody's built any signals, you know that a signal is going to cost you anywhere from $30 to $100. And then the electronics to run that signal is another $50 to $100. And all of a sudden the money starts bouncing up. There's Jim Cameron, I think it is, someone Cameron, who's on the LCC committee, I believe, and he's also a member of JMRI, I believe, the upper echelon of JMRI. He's doing work to build an interface between LCC and MSS because he sees the benefit of the MSS simplicity of it. But then if you get to a complex thing where you need a little bit more, he's trying to design and build so that, you know, you've got a junction with a diamond in the middle, and you're trying to do all the protection and make it all work right and all the signals, to have LCC control all that stuff, but use the data coming in off of MSS to do it. So the LCC would be contained to his module set, but then it would hook to MSS around it to get the data it needed for what's coming. So there are people doing some work with that.
I could see you could probably do it. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was going to add one thing I've noticed, because I'm not a DCC expert by any means. I just kind of like, hey, you guys know what to do, have at it. We divide into teams, and there's a lot of experience in DCC over the years. And Bob, you can probably talk about this better than I can, but you know, everybody knew what to do as far as getting things set up. And you know, even before the setup, you know, Jacob Dameron was canvassing everybody. Okay, who has what components? What do we need? And when we came into this thing, there was a plan for where the electronics were going to go and who was going to set it up, who's going to troubleshoot it and everything. And Bob, you know, why don't you step in and kind of give the details from your perspective?
Yeah, well, part of that is how we do electronics has changed in 20 years. 20 years ago, we didn't have LNRPs to separate out the throttle jacks from the boosters and command station. Does anybody not know what an LNRP is? Everybody's heard of an LNRP before? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, so an LNRP is a repeater. And what we started doing in NorCal with the Northern California guys, and we got this from the Europeans, Freee-mo. If you know about LocoNet and the way the LocoNet cable is, there's 6 wires in the LocoNet cable. 2 of them are ground wires. The center 2 are the talk to your throttle, and the outside 2 are used to talk to from command station to command station to command station. And those are what keep the command station synchronized, and so the command station talking to the boosters, they're all in line, and that communication, it's identical communication that goes down the other 2 wires, but it goes between the command stations. On a throttle jack, those outside 2 wires are also used as the battery saver. So when you plug your throttle in, it draws the power off those outside 2 wires to power your throttle. Everything's hunky-dory until you get to a Freee-mo setup, and you've got all these throttle jacks, and 8 people plug their throttles in, and they all go into battery saver mode and start sucking electricity from those outside 2 wires. And when that happens, the voltage on those wires go down, and the command stations start getting out of synchronization, and the world goes to pot real quick. Just you spin out of control, and you don't know what's going on because it just gets weird. You start having weird results. So what NorCal started doing is they started a thing that we picked up from the Europeans, is you take those outside 2 wires and you don't feed them to your throttle network, and you have a separate network going between your boosters and a separate network going out to your throttles, and you just feed 12 volts up onto those outside 2 wires, and you use a separate 12 volt DC power supply to give you your battery saver, because since you don't have boosters out there, the network doesn't care. Well, Digitrix picked up on what people were doing, and they built what they call an LNRP Extra, which is a local net repeater. And what it does is it does more than that. It has optical isolation. And so what it does is it takes and gives you 2 sets of jacks and builds you a local net to go between your boosters and a local net to go out to your throttles. And nothing you can do on your throttles can affect the wiring between the boosters, so that if you have pins, you know, you're plugging in and out and you have a cheap jack and 2 of the pins moving short, well, that's okay. The network, the boosters keep running because they're isolated from it. It also boosts the signal. If you're having a weak signal, it can boost it up. So it's really just a way of isolating the two. And so we've started doing that. That's the big thing in the last 5 years, has been getting incorporated into Freee-mo setups, and just modular setups in general. People started building what they call booster in a box, and they'll take a plastic toolbox, put their booster in it, put a bunch of connections on the sides, set it all up. So they just have this case that comes in and sits down, you plug it into the wall, and you've got your connections, and you connect up to it, rather than having a jumble of pieces sitting on a table. It's just things like that. So we've also started taking our throttle network and separating it into districts, just like we do our boosters. And we have a booster district for track power, and we have a throttle district for the throttle jacks, and feed each of those districts separately off an LNRP. And that helps just stabilize all the weird inconsistencies you get in your local net from having really long runs and branches and people plugging in throttles drain and putting a drain on stuff. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Did I do what you wanted, Kevin?
Yes, yeah. And I will add that you and everybody did a phenomenal job. That layout operated very well for the size of it and everything. I mean, there's a lot of concerns about it, but hats off to everybody that jumped in and got it set up as quickly as you could, got it all up and working. And it was great. The moment we said time to run trains, because we sure had a blast from that point on.
Yeah.
So I know this is kind of a separate subject, and I think we'll probably do a clinic on that later, but just briefly, when you do get set up, how do you go about doing operations on there? Just a real brief description.
Well, kind of what you do, we have a freight operations chief. I was passenger operations chief. And, one of the nice things about having branch lines is that there's usually a lot of industry on there, and you can switch to your heart's content and not interfere with the passenger trains, which tend to stick to the main lines. We had a couple guys that volunteered to dispatch. We all had the handheld radios and stuff like that. So it just kind of came together because it's, there's a lot of guys that just really wanted to do that. And, you just look at the railroad and figure out what you think you can do with it. I wasn't able to do much in the way of passenger train operations because Dallas Union Terminal wasn't functional on the one end. And, but it will be for the next setup. So what I plan to do for the passengers is kind of recreate something like the morning rush of passenger trains, because between the 40 guys that came, we have most of the premier passenger trains that used to stop at Dallas Union Terminal. So, a lot of them used to show up in the morning. So let's see if we can replicate that, where we'll set out head end cars, or cut in coaches. Some trains will terminate where we have to turn the equipment and stuff like that. So really it's just to the extent of your imagination or what you want to do. And I've got I worked my career with Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. And so having worked in service design, I can adapt what I know to setting up these kind of operations, knowing what everybody has.
Yeah, at this setup, we had Wichita passenger terminal. We had Dallas. And then what was the other one that was out that other branch?
Chicagoland.
Oh, we had Chicago. But then there was another one out the other branch.
Not
The guys from Kansas.
Not Omaha, but Burlington.
Okay, Burlington. So we had 4 major passenger stations. So, you can simulate operations by having trains going from Dallas out to those 4 places and back.
Yeah.
For freight work, they'll make up switch lists and send somebody down a branch because you've told people ahead of time, told the freight operator guys that I have a dock that takes refrigerated cars and it can hold 5 cars. And I've got a dock that needs box cars and a dock that needs flat cars. And what kind of cars and what equipment should be coming into and how many spots you have. And it's just kind of loosely they'll take and put some cars together and say, pick up this train in Watsonville Junction and head out to here and switch these cars out. And you'll just go in and leave a car and pick up a car and leave a car and pick up a car. As for dispatch operations, there's different levels. The lowest level is what we do most of the time at most of the setups I've been to, and we call that self-dispatching. And that's it. You're running along and you come to a piece of single track and you have to stop at the turnout and look down the layout and say, yo, Kevin, what, you coming this way? And Kevin's like, oh, I got to do some switching here. And you go, okay, well, I'm going to come to you then. And you take the track and head down to him and you pass him, and then he's done with what he's doing and he looks down the other way and he sees Mark coming and he says, hey, Mark, I've been waiting. And Mark goes, okay. And Mark stops and Kevin comes through on the single track. And so you're just communicating with the other people on the layout about who's going next and who's going when. And sometimes it's like, man, it is clogged up behind me. Go a different direction.
Yeah.
You don't want to go down here. And then we got up into dispatching, and that who was going when was being controlled by a radio dispatcher. And they had a whiteboard and they had a somewhat drawing of the layout and the places they controlled and the places they cared about. And they literally at times were taking binoculars and looking out across the layout because it was so big to see what was going on and who was where.
Yeah.
But they would give somebody train orders, you have permission to take these blocks, contact me when you're clear. And so you'd run down through the tracks, and when you got to the other end, you'd call the dispatcher and tell them, you're clear of this. And now all of a sudden you're on right hand running double track main line. So you run along until you get to the next spot that's dispatcher controlled, and then you stop or the dispatcher knows where you're going. And maybe when you clear and drop the blocks, they'll say you have permission for, and they'll give you that next set of blocks right then. Or you need to wait for train blank to coming in the opposite direction past you. So, there's guys that have a lot of fun mentally out that part of it and doing that jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so,
our dispatcher did a phenomenal job with really no real dispatching aids other than the whiteboard.
Yep. And some markers and a pair of binoculars.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's usually like 2 or 3 guys up there, and we had a spreadsheet for people who had to sign in their train and so forth. And the radio communications is good. Like any real railroad, there's times you're going to have to wait, even just to get in on the radio because there's so much radio chatter. But everybody kept their radio communications as minimal as possible to keep the channels open as much as possible. So everything about it just worked out great for a bunch of guys just coming together and just, hey, let's make it run. And even the free running, when we had no dispatchers, everybody did as Bob described. They were just kind of looking ahead and, just talking to each other and, hey, how do we want to get by and so forth. And, one of our concerns going into this is that, 40 people and, over 100 different modules, how's this all going to work? But it worked way better than what Jacob and I could have hoped. Everybody had a good time, and that's really what we wanted.
I think everybody got to run as much as they wanted, and nobody was disappointed about running. Part of it helps that I've probably met face to face and run with at least 50% of the people that were there.
Mm-hmm.
But I live in California. I've been to Portland, Sacramento, Anaheim, Salt Lake City, and Kansas to do setups. And now Elk City. So I've traveled, but I travel, say, when I went to Kansas, is because a number of people from Kansas and out in that area have come to setups in California. And I felt that I was returning the favor, taking my modules to go play with them. And, in fact, that was in 2008. That was the first time we set up at the Anaheim convention. And I think it was 2008 down in Anaheim at the NMRA convention. And that was the first time that we'd really tested the Freee-mo philosophy, because up until that time, it's California had run together, Kansas had run together, Canada had run together, and all these pockets had run. And that was the first convention where it was California, Ricky Kyle, he wasn't in Kansas at that time, but there was Dusty McCoy from Kansas, and Ricky, and I can't think of the other guy's name, but there was a group of 4 or 5 of them that came out from there. Larry Sebling and his wife, Lori Sebling, brought down 2 or 3 modules from Chilliwack, British Columbia, and came down. And so we had all these modules come together, and we're just like, I know you're feeling, Kevin, because we're just like, oh God. And the connections went together and it worked.
Yeah.
And it was just like such a relief when the first train started running, because it's like, wow, it runs. They work. They built their modules to the spec. I plugged them together and it worked. And that was really something.
What do you so you had the rail set back 1 inch.
Yes.
I've seen some talk, or I want to say Jacob's
Yes.
modules have the flush end rails. How do you deal with that? And what's your thought on the flush end versus the setback?
I like the concept of the flush end. The flush end requires a higher degree of accuracy in everything you do getting to that point. Let's talk about go backwards. Prior to Freee-mo, the standard was you'd leave a 9-inch gap, 4.5 inches on each side, and you take a piece of Atlas 9-inch track and drop it down in there and hook it up. And that gave you a lot of latitude for sloppiness. We brought it down to 2 inches, which still leaves some latitude for, I'll say, sloppiness, but not as much. You've got to be much better on your thing. When you go to the flush rails, you have to be even higher accuracy. Dennis, right? You holding your hand up. Are you leaving us? Okay, you're on mute, but we got the idea that you're going to go on your way.
Thanks for joining us, Dennis. Yeah.
And so when you have the flush rails, you have to even be more accurate. Now the Neo, I think it's Neo.
Yeah, Neo.
That Jacob designed has space for rail joiners on the ends.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, when you meet up with a standard Freee-mo module, you have to have 1-inch rails, fitted rails, instead of 2-inch fitted rails, and they still go together.
Mm-hmm.
So they're designed to go together. But you have your accuracy on your module has to be way super tight to make it work right.
Yeah, the Neo ends are 3D printed. Jacob designed them, and you can get them from Shapeways. I have the Neo ends on my modules. And really the basic theory behind going with the Neos is trying to set up quicker so we can run trains sooner. That's what drove Jacob thinking about designing something different than the time it takes to get the fitter rails cut and put in place.
Yeah. There's been a lot of different things. People are talking about how do we do pins where you have one male and one female pin on each module. You know, your left side is a female, your right side is a male.
Yeah.
When they spin around and come together, they work, and boom, and it comes together, and use flush joints. And we just have I think it's coming. It's just a matter of somebody spending the time and money and energy to figure out how to do it that everybody can follow. Because that's the other problem, is that we have some modelers out there that are building Freee-mo modules. We're trying to raise the bar in quality and workmanship, but we also don't want to exclude new modelers that don't have all the skills. And it gets really tough because it's like, you've got to have good track work. And if you can't do it, you've got to ask for help. You've got to be able to find somebody in your neighborhood that's willing to play with you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we do is if you have just built a module and it's untested, we'll put it on a branch line, and that's an opportunity to work the bugs out of it without mainline trains derailing or having all kinds of problems up. So, you know, there's ways to work with it, but Bob is right. You know, everybody's here pretty much has been in the game, has got good modules and so forth, and are well known. But that doesn't make it easy to bring new people in, but that's something we got to work on.
Yeah. Well, and part of the problem with is that you've got 60 people that all spent well over $1,000 to be there.
Yeah.
So that's $60,000 was spent, and it takes one bad module in the middle of the layout to just destroy it for everybody.
Yeah.
And so it's a real tested and proven modules is a thing. Locally, we have small setups, and sometimes it's not even setups. It's just bring your module over, and we're having a work session for the weekend, and we're going to set up a layout that's 25 feet of module, so there's enough room so you can test an engine and rolling stock and play with some stuff, and bring your module. And I'll tell you, the guys in California can be brutally tough, but they're going to take tools and look at your module and go over it with a fine-tooth comb to see that it meets the specs and is going to live up to standard, and they're not going to hold back to tell you that it's got a problem. I have one module that when I first built it, oh God, it was classic problems on it. I won't go into it, but the track's been on that, pulled up and put back down 3 times on that module before I got it right. And that was when I first started, and they were being gentle with me. I'm like, what happened is the end went down. It's a real easy thing to do when you're sanding your roadbed. If you're not careful, you roll off the end of your module. And so the end of my module rolled off, and my track came out to the end and rolled down 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more. And they're like, oh God, what are we going to do? And I'm like, and they're being all hushy talking about it. I'm like, what's wrong? And they're like, well, the track kind of, so what are we going to do to fix it? Now, what if we pull the track up and stuff some shims underneath it? And they're like, look at me, can we do that? I'm like, it's wrong. Yes. And so we're just pulling it with flex track. So we're just pulling it up off the roadbed. And one of the guys had some business cards, and he pulled out his business cards, and we're cutting them into pieces and stuffing them underneath there until we got it level and fixed. And I'm like, it's wrong. It's not going to work. It's obviously we have to do something. I'm going to have to pull the track up anyway to fix it. So let's pull it up right now. So,
yeah. Well, thanks for talking about all that, and we're getting got some members dropping off, so it's getting late. But before we go, I'd like to just share real quick this y'all can see. So we mentioned Mini-mo, and I'm working on a set of Mini-mos. I started like a couple years ago, so I've got the track down on one of them. But so here's I built this out of 1/2 inch, the Baltic birch cabinet grade plywood. A lot of this on the side is putty and things, and so I've originally started just doing these for my whole plan is just doing these as test modules that I can use when I build other modules. So I can just hook these on the end and have a place to run trains on and off. And, if they ever do wind up meeting Freee-mo spec or something, then I could bring them out as, either an adapter or utility or just an end module, just kind of my first foray into it. So here's working out some track plans. So this is actually both of them hooked together. So they're 1 foot wide, 4 foot long, 6 inches tall. And so these are the fast track templates. I cut those out and laminated them. So I've got a whole bunch of them that I can, I taped all this together. And I think I've got it hanging up on the wall over there. Just kind of like visualize the track plan on the surface. So those are great things, great tools to use. And this is just laying a car on it, seeing how things would fit. Go ahead.
It's kind of funny because, when people ask me about building a module, I always say, design your track plan and then draw your frame around it.
Right. Well, and that's how you get that freeform, too. So,
Yep.
Yeah. So here's doing the cork row bed on there. I just glued it down with the tight bond glue on that so far. So the part of this, I was doing a 3-way switch in there. So I've got the fast track jig. These modules I did hand laid track on all of it. There's testing them there once I got them all kind of got some made up there. And we're talking about the Neotype plates. I actually designed this because I found those on Shapeways, but I kind of did my own like spin on it. I could make the rails flush on it, but I just wanted something just to kind of anchor the rails down and keep them on the end. So I'll see how they work out. This is just something I wanted to. I 3D printed that on my own printer. And that's actually the filament's an ASA filament, so it's like a nylon type filament. And I thought that it would be resistant to heat better for soldering, because I'm trying to solder the rails onto the deals. That's not soldered. I don't think that's soldered on there. That's just to test out the fit and everything. I may have soldered it, but anyway, and there's painted all the roadbed black and starting to lay the ties, gluing them down. I'm stained them with this is the Minwax dark walnut stain on the ties, and that's something I haven't quite. I need to figure out how to hide the PCB ties, so I think I might just go around and spray the whole thing with the camo black to hide all that. So I think these ties over in this section right here are just India ink and alcohol on there. So more shots of the track. I think I had that in. So that's kind of just a full wide view on that. So. And you can see I've got some screws there that my thought is that'll kind of hold the rail up, solder to that. There's a solder glob there I need to get rid of. And this is kind of an experiment that I took a long time designing, but it sort of failed. Well, not really failed. It works, but I don't think I'm going to do any more modules like this. So this is a EMT conduit. I made these little fittings. My thought was to have folding legs that are adjustable to fit up into here. And here's a video of the legs working.
So you 3D printed all those parts for them?
Yeah, it's all 3D printed, and that's all done through PETG. And I designed all that on. I actually designed that in Fusion 360, and so and actually made it hinge and everything. And this was I started building this right when Rona shut everything down, so I had a lot of time on my hands to design all this and work it all out. So it's pretty neat system, but the whole problems with it is mainly just that weight. When I added that into the modules, those things got super heavy, and I even went in and I've even got some little blocks that I think they're printed out of TPU that the legs will snap into to hold them up. And the other part of it, the telescoping, these little sections right here, this also doesn't work that well also, because I'll have it up and just putting my hand on the top, it'll fall down. So I need to work out some better way of securing that joint where it's a lot stiffer. So that I think that whole thing needs to just be redesigned if I want to do that. But I think wood legs would probably be the better idea. A lot lighter weight. So more. I painted this up, put it in. Actually filled the frog joints with solder. I thought that would look cool, and
as long as you dig them back out to the NMRA specifications, yes, they look really cool.
Yeah, and that's what really took the time. I sat there with a little chisel and kind of like filed a little chisel to dig all that out. So And so that I've got all the track work on there. My next step, I've got to wire it up. So that's where I'm at. I haven't done any of the wiring yet on it. This is so I'm calling these two Statler and Waldorf after the Muppets, because they kind of heckle. Being hooked onto a module, I feel like they'd kind of be hecklers on the module, or something. So so this is kind of a control panel that I've got a Prusa Mark III that's got the multi-material filament, and so all the color in here is actually multicolored filament. And that was all done through Fusion 360, and actually it's so every color is a different module. So I had, or not module, a model. So I had to cut like all that, and then it all meshes together and prints it like that. So it's quite time consuming to make the panel work that way. And then one of these I printed, everything was just a bit too small, so I had to open the holes up a little bit bigger for things to fit through. And I'm planning to have one of these on each side, and then work out push buttons where your push button control can toggle the tortoise switches. And then I'll tell you,
you want to know the answer to that is get rid of your tortoises and buy the Walther switch machines. They're
okay.
So cool.
I guess
the new Walther switch machines are awesome.
Are those DCC like capable, or they?
Yes, they have a DCC decoder built into them. They work off of a momentary push button switch. They'll work off of a toggle switch. There's so many. They just go find it's something control systems is what they call it, and find their advanced users guide and download it and look through it. You seem like you're an advanced person in that regard, and you'll just be shocked and surprised at what all they do.
Yeah. I'll look into them. Right now I was working on looking at doing like an Arduino type solution or something like that, kind of a more Rube Goldberg, I know there's some other toggle type circuits out there too. So, and then I made 3D printed a routing jig to recess the throttle jack in there. And I just got had these in my inventory there, so I thought I'd put those in. And I actually have an NCE little power cab, and so I was going to set that up as a little, just a little throttle that I use here in the workshop. And then I think these are compatible with NCE and Digitrax, from what I understand. So that's why I put those in.
Yes, I do believe they are.
And so when I started doing the track on there, I was wanting to experiment with trying to do tie plates on the rails. And so this is the Proto 87 tie plates, and made a little test piece with that. And they look nice. So here's the track section with the tie plates. And then this one just is spiked with the regular micro engineering spike on it. And while they do look good, they're real pain to put on. So, maybe if I'm doing a nice, highly detailed scene, it'd be worth it.
If you use their jigs, they go together a lot easier.
Right. Yeah. And I've got the one tie plate jig that just has the two of them on there. Okay. The one thing I don't like, because normally I think they want you to glue the rail down, or you glue these on there, but I wish that the ones I got they don't have holes in every, so like to do spikes on it. And these are I think these are the scale spikes. I can't remember.
They look like
they are. Yeah. So those scale spikes are not as long as the micro engineering ones. And that's where I'd like to have, you would really need to have all the holes done, so you can try to put as many spikes in as you can, I think. And gluing it, I think, would be better. But then I'm worried about rail creep, the rail shifting and all that stuff.
if you
on there.
really want to know more about that, I can hook you up with a guy that's laid a lot of that track.
Okay. Okay.
He worked for Proto 87 for a number of years and built all their pre-made turnouts that people would buy from, that were being shipped out. So he is way over the top familiar with it.
Cool.
So just because you doing that, let's see, which one's that one? So this is the track plan for Watsonville Junction as it is right now today. Double track main line. Got some crossovers. It's got a ladder. Now, we built that based off of this track plan.
Okay, cool.
That we've got, that's a 1958 track plan of Watsonville Junction. And so, it had 3 tracks up here. We, had to do some license, but you can see, and this is shortened from what it really is. It's much longer than this, but it's a full junction with a Y. And then this is the branch that goes out to Santa Cruz. And so we were trying to build that part of it. That's what we're starting with. And so that's what this is. And so that's the track plan. And then it's like, okay, so how do you put a frame around that? Well, that's how you put a frame around that. Offset and make a parallelogram on one end. And now my tracks are in the middle coming in, and the tracks go straight down through the module, parallelogram at the other end, and they go out. And then we started making it wider in the middle because we wanted to get more tracks in here. Now,
what's the square, the little on the right side? What's that little
this here?
Yeah, that I would say
that's
box.
That's the frame. That's the wood that's making the top of the module underneath the track. This area in here and this triangle up here are open, being filled with foam.
Okay.
And then the real plan for Watsonville. So this is what I was showing you is this is some old drawings, but the full Watsonville really looks like this. If we build everything we want to build, that's the end we built this. Then there's a ladder coming up and another ladder going back down, and you can put and all of these 2 pieces go together, but this end is common and this end is common and this end is common. And these 2 pieces go together, but this end is common. So you can leave any piece, these 2 pieces out or these 2 pieces out, or put this extension down here or put this extension here or put this extension down here.
Wow.
So this shows it a little bit better. This is what the real thing looks like and what we've got planned, but then you can start adding. And so you can take and, you can build this or this or this or this or this. And, we started just looking at all the ways we could put Watsonville Junction together in all these different formats.
Wow.
And so our plan, our goal is to build this with some extra straight sections that'll go into it. And this has changed, obviously, because you can see that's all the same width, and we've made the center part wider now. But, talk about crazy dreams.
Yeah. Are those like 4-foot section modules?
Oh, you mean the length of this right here?
Yeah,
well,
like
that's 6.
most
that's 6 feet.
6 foot.
That's 6.
Okay. Yeah.
Most of this one's 5 foot, but the others are all 6 foot. This one might not be. So right now, this is basically this is what we've got right now. Oh shoot! So I'm on a layer that doesn't show. Let me go to there and do that again. Currently, it's like 33 feet long, or it's 28 feet 10 inches right now. That's 28 feet of module that we have.
Cool.
And this piece down here was specifically designed just to be able to take the internal joint end and bring it back out to Freee-mo. So as we build more pieces to go onto this end just keeps moving down until we build the right-hand end of it. And then you were talking about panels. That's what my panel looks like for Watsonville. These are all momentary push button switches with lights. There, it takes 2 LEDs, no resistors, the switch, and you hook it onto the Walther switch machine, and it runs all the lights.
Wow.
And it's three wires coming up from a switch machine to a panel, a common and 2 ends.
What's the F and L? Are those lights?
Those will eventually be fouling and limit lights, because when you're looking out into that module, you can't really see what's going on. And so we want to have optical detectors. And if you're coming down and you're bringing your train down to stop as close as you can to this turnout, you stop when the limit light comes on. And if the fouling light goes on, you have to back up a little. These holes here are for toggle switches, so you'll be able to turn off each track independently. And these are a light to show whether the track is on or off.
Cool.
So
Yeah,
you can go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the fouling limit light's a good idea. I've never seen that on the layout so far, but yeah.
Thank you. That was my idea.
Yeah, I've operated yards a lot, and it's it's hard to, unless they have a thing painted on the track, it's sometimes may not get the train far enough back to clear, something coming in.
So I do laser cutting and engraving. So this is all laser engraved.
On what material?
It's on Baltic birch 1/8 inch plywood.
Okay, cool.
I take and I stain it black and then engrave the top layer off, which lets the wood color come through, and then put a clear coat on it.
Looks
to
nice.
seal it. Yeah, and then, so down here it's got the limit fouling in case people forget. And then what we plan to do is on these sections that are added, we'll have a panel on them, and each and have detectors, like 2 or 3 rows of detectors in here, 1, 2, 3 probably, and have a set of lights that will be on this, so you can, when this yard's full of stuff, you'll be able to watch your train progressing through the yard and see the lights go on and know exactly where you are and be able to stop short of something. Or we're thinking that would be useful, but we haven't decided yet. And so, but that's the concept, is that there'd be lights in here telling you what's going on as you travel through. And if you're looking out across the yard and there's an empty track, you could look at the panel, and according to what lights are on or what lights are off, you can say, oh, track number 106 is empty. And then you can go down to the other end to the ladder and load yourself into 106.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
What kind of sensors are you using there?
Yeah. Right now, one of the other guys I work with, Chad Stallsworth, is designing our own optical sensors for that.
Oh, gee.
And we do the ones that we're going to use in the yard will not work in really low lighting. So if we're in a low light situation, we don't care. Okay, so the opticals won't work anymore. But they work off of ambient light. And what we do is we put in 2 sensors, and it's actually 2 tracks and 1 extra sensor, because there's 3 on every card, and he's writing up the code, and it's being run by Arduinos or other small circuits. And what it is there's 2 sensors. There's a reference sensor and a sensor between the tracks, and these sensors are smaller than a pencil. They're about an 1/16 of an inch square, and he's got them mounted on about a 1/8 inch round piece of circuit board. So you drill like an 1/8 inch hole in the layout, and you drop this thing down in there, and it just disappears, because you can paint up to all but this thing that's about the size of a grain of rice. And it does a light, ambient light comparison. And so it says, am I seeing the same amount of light as my reference, which is just outside the track next to me? And when there's a difference, there's a train there. And when they're the same, there's not a train there. And so in low light situations or reduced lights, it'll work. In bright light situations, it should work. But as the light goes down and it gets dimmer, they start to not work. But we're working on, he's working on code and trying to figure out if that's the best thing to do. But we can, with him designing that circuit and building them ourselves, they're fairly cheap to put in. But we've decided that they will not work for signals, because signals, people love to run in the dark, and it'd be not very functional if the signal stopped working in the dark, because that's one of the best times to run with signals.
Yeah.
So we're probably going to use Iowa scale signal detectors. They're train locator, I think they call it, or something like that. Train watcher, train locator. But if you look at their equipment, they have one that's a long stick that's about 6 inches long and about 3/8 of an inch wide. But they have another one that's shorter, and then it's got a cable that goes to the electronics. And so you've got a sensor on a short stick that's about 1 inch or 2 long. And they're all open source. So Chad wants to just build the electronics end ourselves and just buy their sensor to go in the tracks and run their sensors, and then run it down to our own circuit boards underneath. So, because all the circuits and all the code are open source, because they've built an open source product. So if you're on their website, you can follow it out to GitHub and get all the stuff you need.
Why are you not running like infrared sensors?
Because that is what the Iowa scales, because an infrared sensor needs a detector and a transmitter, and we were trying to hide it as much as possible. And so we were playing with these native ambient light sensors and doing the comparison, thinking that we could, but we just decided we can't make that work for the signals, but it'll work for our fouling points. And I tell you, I'll show you a picture of those. You almost can't see the darn thing in the layout, because they're that small. They literally look like a piece of newspaper between the tracks, scale newspaper. Because the Iowa scales working on infrared? No, the Iowa scales are working at, well, I don't know if it's infrared, but it's a proximity sensor, and it's got a transmitter and a receiver all in one. The other thing about the transmitter receivers, when you start running spine cars and some things like that, they have a harder time detecting them. And so it's a catch-22. Do you put it in the middle of the track, or do you put it off to the side a little bit so it sees the side of a well car or a spine car, or do you get it in the middle so it'll see the couplers when the space between the cars goes by? And it's just a lot of choices. Did that answer your question adequately?
Yeah. It's far above and beyond what I could do.
Yeah. Yeah, but so when we start looking at something like this down here, with something this big, we're thinking a panel on each one of these with train indicators. So you can look, and when you look out across this yard, you can take in, that track way up there has a train or doesn't have a train, and being able to just like walk down the side and see that would be useful. Whether we'll ever get to that, I don't know. Whether we'll get to all of this built, I don't know. But what a full facility this was.
Yeah.
This part in here, and because you go back to this drawing, you can see it's got this double ladder in the middle. It's got this whole rip yard out here. It had all this industries down around the sides. There was a Y there. There was also a turntable there. There was a 6 or 8 stall roundhouse there, a depot there. It's just so much stuff's there. Oh, and a scale on an icing dock and an icing platform, which we're building about a 10-foot icing platform to go on the module, or at least that's our current plan.
Don't you love the thinking big aspect of this thing? Because this is the kind of stuff that supports running full-size trains and so forth. I mean, it's just really neat to see all those long trains out there running, and they can clear each other in sidings, or they have yard tracks they can go in and out of. So makes a really fun operation.
Yeah. So we're working on it.
It makes all the model and the like big things possible, even if you don't have a lot of space at your house. So,
Well, and if we do, as we build more of Watsonville, and Watsonville grows and grows and grows, and we get up to something like this, Elk City is about the only place we'll be able to set it up. It's about the only place we get enough, because this is 61 feet of module. We want to give Jacob a run for his money to not have the biggest module set. So whether we build all that, Jeff Parker wants to, Tim Reynolds wants to, so we'll see.
15 years ago, I was out in California working at Vandenberg, and there was a group at Santa Maria in Slow there that was doing Freee-mo. They were just getting started. Are they still in working?
You're talking to him right here.
You're from Slow?
I'm from Slow, and I've been doing Freee-mo for 20 years now.
Okay. I probably ran into you. They were setting up there in a barn. It was a drying barn. And I can't remember the guy's name, Mike or somebody. His family owned it.
Tim Reynolds.
Pardon?
Tim Reynolds.
Okay.
Yep. We used to set up in the Reynolds brothers barn. Long story short, his father or his uncle passed away, and it was his father and his uncle ran the family farming business, and his father was old enough, and there was a disagreement between his dad and his aunt, who was part of the group by marriage, and his dad, being on the softer side, finally just said, "Here, this much money, and you own the farm, and I leave. Just buy me out." And so she hustled up the huge amount of money and bought the farm out from under him, and and his dad retired. And so we lost access to that barn. That was a great location.
well, I want to thank you for presenting, and I need to wrap this up because I need to get going. But
But it's only 9:30. What, you want to go to bed at a reasonable hour?
no, I
We
need to
usually
got to spend some time with the wife. So, but no, I've reached out to Jacob while we were talking just to confirm, and he said it looks good that he will be able to present to us in May. So he's going to show us the Dallas Union Terminal that we've been talking about, and so that ought to be interesting to look at. So I've seen pictures of it, and it's pretty fascinating. Even the track work's what really amazes me, and all that. That's what gets me excited about doing Freemo, the cool, long switches and having prototype, yard gliders, things like that.
Give me 30 seconds, and I'll give you a teaser for Jacob's presentation. I have one, that picture.
Yeah, Jacob got me into Freemo.
Yeah.
And he has really helped me a lot. It's helped me build my modules so they're built to the high standards and everything. So
cool.
Couldn't be more pleased.
That's Dallas Union Terminal.
Amazing.
And that's just one view part of it. It comes down to my left, down to my right, goes off down around the corner, all the way down. I think the black module, is that black sided module?
That's Tower 107 down there, South Tower.
So this down here is the end of the module. It goes from there all the way to here. It goes another 6 or 8 feet to my right and about 4 or 5 feet behind me to my left.
Yeah.
But it's hard to see, but this is the road underpass right here. The grassy knoll and the Kennedy location. So that's what Jacob's building. There's your tease. He's going to talk about that monster and beast.
Yeah, it'll be great. Cool. Well, I want to thank Bob and Kevin for joining us, and just stay tuned for future sessions coming up, our clinics coming up. We'll probably like I said, I would like to maybe invite them back and talk about op sessions more in depth, and maybe even shoot. Seems like electronics and wiring might be another subject as well too. So we might have to visit that later in the year. So I want to remind everybody the May meeting is on May 15th. So that's with Jacob. And June's meeting, so we're not going to do an in-person Zoom meeting or not in person, but we won't do a Zoom meeting because we're going to be doing the meet up in Lubbock on the June 16th and 17th up there. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Thank you for having me. I hope I didn't bore anybody.
You did great, Bob.
It was great.
Good evening.